Hello and welcome to week 8 in Statistics for Psychology. Now, up until now, we have been focusing our energies primarily on descriptive statistics, describing the data, sometimes describing our sample, describing the different characteristics of our sample in our data. Now we start looking at pretty much tests and hypotheses. This chapter 8, tests and hypotheses here, with a pretty big emphasis on hypotheses. Now, in the field of psychology, we are often looking at variables and we want to know how they relate to each other. Do they correlate? And if they correlate in some way, is there a sort of natural relationship between them? Is there a cause-effect type relationship? And so whenever we're trying to think about those things, we, based on our reading and based on what we know so far, formulate. One of the steps in the scientific method is to formulate a hypothesis, which is an educated guess based on the preponderance of the evidence that we have looked at, everything that we know. How do we believe these two variables might relate to each other? And our hypothesis is a statement that describes that relationship. So when we construct hypotheses, there are always two of them for every relationship that we're trying to describe. The first one is the one that predicts that there is a relationship and what that relationship is going to be. What's the nature of that relationship? The next one, referred to as the null hypothesis, is there is no relationship. That's it. Whatever I said in the other one isn't happening. So when we construct hypotheses, let's say I believe, based on everything that I've read, that if I show supportive slides up on the screen during my class, accompanied by my lecture, people learn better. And I'm going to measure learning by giving a quiz on the content of my lecture. Okay, so that's what I want to study. If I believe that the slideshows are going to result in better comprehension, I might have a hypothesis that sounds like this. Students who participated in a lecture with accompanying slides will score higher on the test of that material than students who participated in the lecture without the slides. So my operational definitions are in there. The actual, not the, slides make you learn better, those kind of like meta things. I'm going right into my experiment. You can tell what my experimental design is going to be. I'm going to have one group of students get the lecture with the slides, and I'm going to have another group of students gain the same lecture without the slides, and we're going to test them all and see who does better. But when I write that all out, I have to go through all of those. So students who participate in lecture with slides will score better on a test of the material than students who participated in a lecture without slides. That is what we call the alternate hypothesis. The null hypothesis is written out just like that, but you say it like this. There will be no difference in the test of the material between students who participated in a lecture with slides and students who participated in a lecture without slides. You write it all out again. And you see that in terms of the words used, those two sentences are very similar to each other. So you don't say, as a null hypothesis, there will be no relationship. That's what you're trying to say, but you don't write it out. You have to write it out so it's very similar to the alternative hypothesis. So there's some terms for you. We have the null hypothesis, which means there's nothing going on, and the other one, which is what you think is going to happen. So they're very similar in the way they're written, same words, repeating, exactly what you have. And we call it the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. That reflects the philosophy that when we go into experimenting, our assumption is the null hypothesis is true unless you have evidence for the alternative. So the null is default. And we use the word alternative. You'll sometimes see experimental as well. But the alternative hypothesis means I've found evidence to support this other hypothesis. And the language that we use is we use rejection language. We don't prove anything. This is, again, part of the world of psychology here. When it comes down to making a decision about the evidence that I've gathered about the effect of slides on comprehension and learning, I will reject one of those two hypotheses. I will either reject the alternative and accept the null, or I will reject the null and accept the alternative. So that rejecting, accepting is what we use instead of I've proved. So the evidence allows me to reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. That kind of statement. So in the quiz, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to come up with some of these sentences. Now, then we use tests and significance. There are factors that come in here regarding sample size, effect size, those, how many people do I have in my study, how big of a difference there is between group 1 and 2. Let's say I might get really, really good results that there's a significant difference between slides and no slides. Significant statistically, but maybe it's only 2 or 3 points actually between the two tests. Is it worth it to create those slides simply to get 2 or 3 points? That's the other question having to do with effect size. And there's also introduction to the notion of power. This will come up here. It'll come up a little bit later, and it's going to come up in research methods. So just a brief introduction to that. So the discussion for this week has to do with a little soapbox of mine, and that is in the world of psychology. You often do not see research published where the null hypothesis was supported and they rejected the alternative hypothesis. This is a problem. Individuals that say they're in the kind of job where they have to publish, be successful publishers in order to keep their jobs, like in some universities and private colleges and whatnot. There's going to be a real effort to get significant positive type of results, but yet I must use prove. Look at that. All these years I can still prove. Finding evidence that there's nothing there is just as important as finding that there is something there. So, for example, if we found out that, drinking 8 glasses of water has no relationship between your health, drinking the water and the health, that there's really no relationship between that high volume of water and being healthier, that'd be good to know. You wouldn't have to drink all that water. So the discussion asks you to discuss the importance of null results. And I would encourage you in preparation for this discussion to do some searches on the web to get some idea about other people's thoughts about null hypothesis. I think they're important. And then we get into a rather involved quiz. Now, there are 10 questions in this quiz. Questions 1 through 4 present a hypothesis, and you have to tell me whether it's a one-tailed or two-tailed hypothesis. I'll give you an example. A one-tailed hypothesis, let's say I'm looking at my original statement. Students who participate in a lecture with slides will perform better than students who participate in a lecture without slides. I'm saying they're going to get better, meaning I'm predicting the direction in which things are going to go. That entails a one-tailed test. Now, if I was going to turn that into a two-tailed test, I might write it as students who participate in a lecture with slides will score differently than students who participated in a lecture without slides. That one-word difference means that I am going to take into consideration that the slides might make it worse. I'm okay with it going either way. Either they'll get better, one-tailed test, or if I'm open to it going both ways, then I will write it that way. This has implications for the levels of criteria we have for significance. Whether I choose a one-tailed test or a two-tailed test will change what significant means. So it's important to understand when a question is written to entail a direction that dictates the direction that I'm going to be looking at. Less, small, more, whatever. Or when I'm equal, I'm just looking for the same. I'm just looking for a change of any kind. Those would be the two-tailed tests. So there's 4 statements, 4 quiz questions where you have to identify, is it a one-tailed test or a two-tailed test? Questions 5 through 8 present research questions of which you are going to write a alternative hypothesis and a null hypothesis. And please remember that they almost look identical. The pattern of words that you use is the same pattern of words you use. The pattern of words you use in the alternative is the same as the pattern you use in the null. And make sure that you write those using the measures or the operational definitions of your variables. That's questions 5 through 8. Question 9 introduces the concept of type 1 and type 2 errors. Look it up, describe those. Then the last question, because type 1 and type 2 errors are associated with sample size and effect size, I want you to describe the relationship between effect size, sample size, and the possibilities of either type 1 or type 2 errors. This question, you really have to get your mind wrapped around it. Take your time. Look things up. My explanation might not be sufficient. You might have to go to study.com or go look up on the web and say, look up for a YouTube video to try and get your head wrapped around this. This may entail doing some additional reading aside from what I've written. What I wrote makes sense to me. I'm asking you to really get your head wrapped around the idea of a type 1, type 2 error, the possibilities of that, and also the effect of sample size and effect size. You can look these things up and learn more about them before you do that quiz. Please do that. Very, very important for you to get your head wrapped around those. And that's it. Just that's it. So actually no Excel this week. So you're free from Excel. Nothing to do with that. I just had the discussion on why are null results still cool, and then the 10-question quiz asking you to demonstrate these skills. We're getting ready to go into our first tests of relationships, and so understanding how we set them up, how we set the significance level is what we're doing about, and how do we set up the operational definitions and the alternative and null hypotheses here. You will fare well getting your head wrapped around this stuff as we go into testing next week. All right, so that's it for this week. Have a great week, and I will see you in the discussions. Take care.